The alarm did not sound like danger. It sounded like a bell in an old temple, soft and almost gentle, and that was the worst part, because I knew what that bell meant. I am Vesic, an observer for the Interstellar Council, and I had spent 11 years of my life watching a single blue planet that everyone else wanted to forget. When that bell rang through the emergency chamber, my hands went cold before my mind even understood why. I ran through the curved hallways of the council spire, past statues of species who had united 1,000 worlds under one banner of peace, and I did not stop to admire them the way I usually did. My translator implant buzzed with a single alert, repeating over and over. Emergency session. Full attendance required. Subject. Sol system. Sol system. Earth. My planet, though I was not born there. I had watched it for over a decade through relay drones and silent listening posts, and in all that time, no one on the council had cared what I found. Now, suddenly, everyone cared. I stepped into the grand chamber, a circular room with a ceiling made of shifting starlight, and I saw something I had never seen before. Every seat was full. Every delegate, from the crystalline Voth elders to the 6-armed trade envoys of Corvain, sat in complete silence, staring at a massive floating screen at the center of the room. On that screen was Earth. Chancellor Idrin, an old and respected leader with skin like carved stone, stood at the podium. Her voice, usually calm and slow, came out sharp and fast. "The Krithali Ascendancy has filed a formal declaration," she said. "They intend to launch what they are calling a pacification strike against the quarantined world, designated Earth." The room erupted into noise. I stood frozen near the back, my mouth dry, my mind racing. Pacification strike. That was a polite term for an invasion, a polite term for war. I raised my hand, but no one looked at my direction. I had been raised on manners, patience, waiting for my turn to speak. But in that moment, I could not wait. "That planet is under council quarantine," I said, loud enough to cut through the murmurs. "No fleet has clearance to enter that system." Chancellor Idrin turned toward me, and for a moment, her old eyes studied me the way one studies an insect that has wandered onto an important document. "Observer Vesic," she said, "your objection is noted. The Ascendancy has submitted evidence that the quarantine is no longer necessary. They call it outdated caution over an insignificant species." Insignificant. I had heard that word about humans more times than I could count, whispered in hallways, laughed about in cantinas near the council spire. Humans were the joke species, the primitive tribe that had barely reached their own moon, the ones the council kept behind a wall out of pity rather than fear. I did not laugh anymore. I had not laughed about them in years. "With respect, Chancellor," I said, stepping forward, "I have monitored that system since before most of you took your seats. There have been changes, signal patterns I cannot explain. Silence where there should be noise." A representative from the Ascendancy delegation, a tall, broad being named Commander Kraith, stood up before the Chancellor could answer. His voice was smooth, confident, almost amused. "Silence," he said, "because they have nothing left to say. Our scans from 3 cycles ago show a species still burning fuel made from dead plants, still fighting wars over lines drawn on maps, still arguing about which god made them. This is not a threat, Chancellor. This is an opportunity. Their planet holds resources our worlds desperately need, and their so-called defenses are little more than metal tubes and gunpowder." Some delegates laughed at that. I did not. "Then why," I asked, my voice trembling with something I did not want to name, "has every listening post near that system gone dark in the last 6 months?" The room went quiet again, but not the way I wanted. It was the quiet of people who had already made up their minds and did not wish to be bothered with new information. Chancellor Idrin folded her hands. "Equipment failure is common at that distance," she said. "The Ascendancy fleet departs within the hour. This session was called as a courtesy, observer, not a debate." A courtesy, as if the fate of an entire species was something you mentioned in passing. the way one might mention the weather. I wanted to argue further, but I saw the look on Commander Kraith's face, calm and certain, and I understood that nothing I said would change the outcome. The vote had already happened somewhere else, in some smaller room, long before this session had even been called. This gathering was simply for show, so the council could say it had been informed. I left the chamber feeling sick in a way I had never felt before. I walked back to my observation post, a small quiet room filled with screens and old data logs, and I sat down heavily in my chair. On my main screen was a paused image from 6 months earlier, the last clear signal I had received from Earth before the strange silence began. It was nothing dramatic. Just a night view of a large human city, lights glowing gold against the dark, streets full of small vehicles, a normal evening on a normal planet. I zoomed into one corner of the image, where I had noticed something odd months ago and never told anyone, because no one had asked. A satellite, small and unregistered, moving in a pattern too precise to be random. I had logged it as an anomaly. Nothing more. I had not imagined then that it might matter. Now I wondered if I had missed something far bigger. I pulled up every report I had filed over the years. Humans building things faster than expected, networks going quiet at strange hours. A sudden and complete stop in what used to be constant, chaotic radio chatter, the kind humans were famous for, arguing over channels about entertainment and sport and politics. All of it had gone still, like a forest before a storm. I had written about these things in careful, measured reports. I had used words like unusual and worth further study. I had never used the word danger because I did not want to be the observer who cried wolf about a species everyone considered harmless. Now that caution felt like a mistake I could not undo. My assistant, a small floating drone named Tick, chimed softly beside me. "You are troubled," Tick said in its flat mechanical voice. "They are sending warships to a planet I do not understand anymore," I said. "And no one wants to hear why that frightens me. The Ascendancy fleet has strong weapons," Tick said. "Human weapons are considered primitive by Council standards." "I know what the Council standards say," I answered. "I am no longer sure the standards are correct." I turned back to the screen and watched old footage of Earth. Ordinary footage, children playing in a park, a market full of fruit and noise, an old man teaching a young one how to fix a broken cart. These were not people preparing for war. Or perhaps they were, and I simply could not see the signs because I had spent too many years believing they were harmless. I thought about the 6 months of silence again. Silence was not the same as weakness. Sometimes silence was the loudest warning of all, if you knew how to listen for it. I stayed at my post long after the emergency session ended, watching the last confirmed images from Earth, searching for anything I might have missed. Outside my window, far above the spire, I could see the faint lights of the Ascendancy fleet gathering in orbit, preparing to leave. Hundreds of ships, sleek and confident, moving like a swarm toward a planet that had gone silent for reasons nobody had bothered to understand. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the dark, watching old recordings of a blue and green world, and for the first time in my long career as an observer, I was afraid, not for the Ascendancy, and not for the Council. I was afraid for whatever the Ascendancy was about to walk into. Chancellor Idrin called the next session for what she described as a final briefing before the Ascendancy fleet crossed into the Sol system. I arrived early, hoping for a chance to speak before the room filled, but Commander Kraith was already there, standing near the podium with 2 of his officers, laughing quietly about something on a data screen. I caught only a few words. Ancient weapons, children with sticks. I felt my jaw tighten, but I said nothing yet. I wanted to save my strength for when it mattered. The chamber filled quickly. Delegates took their seats, murmuring to each other, some excited, some indifferent, a few clearly bored by the entire matter. To most of them, this was a small footnote in a long history of expansion and resource claims. A quarantine lifted, a weak species subdued, a new supply line opened. Nothing more. Chancellor Idrin began the session by summarizing the official record on humanity, and as she read from the old files, I felt my frustration grow with every sentence. Species designation Homo sapiens, she said. Technological level, early atomic age. Weapons systems limited to chemical propulsion and basic nuclear devices. No known access to faster-than-light travel. No known defensive network beyond low-orbit satellites. Threat assessment, minimal. Minimal. That word had been attached to humanity for over a century, copied from report to report without anyone bothering to update it. I raised my hand again, and this time Chancellor Idrin allowed me to speak, though her expression suggested she already regretted it. That threat assessment is over 100 years old, I said. It was written before humans reached their own moon. It has never been revised. Because there has been no reason to revise it, said Commander Kraith, not bothering to stand this time. A species does not change its nature in a century. Apes with better tools are still apes, observer. Several delegates chuckled at that. I felt heat rise in my face, an emotion I rarely allowed myself in public settings. I would like to present new evidence, I said, before anyone could dismiss me further. Chancellor Idrin hesitated, then nodded once. You have 5 minutes, Observer Vesic. I stepped forward and activated the projection unit at the center of the room. The image of Earth appeared again, but this time I overlaid it with the timeline I had built through the night, red markers showing every strange event I had recorded over the past 2 years. 6 months ago, I said, every listening post near Earth went silent within the same 72-hour period. Not gradually, all at once. That is not equipment failure. That is coordination. I pointed to another marker. 8 months ago, encrypted signal patterns appeared for the first time in human broadcasts. Before that, human communication was open and chaotic, easy to intercept. After that point, it became structured, layered, deliberate. I pointed to a third marker, the one that troubled me the most. 1 year ago, 3 separate scouting drones sent by independent traders reported unusual objects in high orbit around Earth. Objects that did not match any known human satellite design. All 3 drones stopped transmitting within days of each report. The room was quiet now, but I could still feel the skepticism in the air, thick and heavy. These are old machines, with old sensors misreading debris, said Commander Kraith. You are building a story out of shadows, observer. I am pointing out a pattern, I said, my voice steady, despite the pounding in my chest. A pattern that suggests a species preparing quietly, not a species standing still. Chancellor Idrin studied the projection for a long moment. The room waited on her response. Even if your pattern is real, she said slowly, the Ascendancy fleet carries enough firepower to end any early-era civilization within hours. What threat could a species without faster-than-light travel truly pose to ships capable of crossing star systems? I did not have a perfect answer to that question, and I knew it. I could not prove what I feared, only that I feared it, and fear alone had never been enough to change a council decision. I do not know, I admitted, but I would rather we discover the answer through caution than through the loss of an entire invasion fleet. Commander Kraith laughed. Not unkindly, but with the confidence of someone who had already won every argument that mattered. Your caution is noted, observer, he said, but this council has already voted. The Ascendancy fleet departs within the hour, exactly as planned. I suggest you prepare your monitoring equipment, so you may record our success for your reports. A few delegates chuckled again, and Chancellor Idrin did not correct them. I realized then that nothing I said would stop what was coming. The decision had been made long before this meeting began, and this session existed only to make the process look thorough. I returned to my seat, my hands shaking slightly, and watched as the council moved on to lesser matters, trade disputes, mineral rights, small quarrels between minor worlds. Earth had already become a closed subject, a formality on the way to something the Ascendancy considered inevitable. After the session ended, I walked back to my post in silence, ignoring the polite nods from delegates who clearly saw me as an overly cautious observer, wasting everyone's time. Only one person stopped me in the hallway, a young trade envoy named Solon, who had sat quietly through the entire session without speaking. "You believe something is wrong there," Solon said, not quite a question. "I know something is wrong there," I said. "I simply cannot prove it in a way this council respects." Solon studied me for a moment, then said quietly, "I hope you are wrong, observer, for all our sakes." I did not answer, because I hoped the same thing, and yet some part of me, the part that had studied every strange signal and every sudden silence, already suspected that hope would not be enough. Back at my post, I opened every channel I had access to, desperate for anything new from Earth, but the silence continued, steady and complete. I checked the orbital feeds showing the Ascendancy fleet, hundreds of ships now moving into formation, their commanders no doubt already imagining an easy, celebrated victory. Tick floated beside me, quiet for once, sensing my mood. "You believe they are flying into something they do not understand," Tick said. "I believe," I said slowly, "that a species capable of going silent for 6 months, encrypting their signals, and placing unknown objects in high orbit, is not a species standing still. I believe the Ascendancy sees an anthill. I fear they are about to disturb something far more dangerous." I spent the following hours reviewing every fragment of data I owned, searching for some detail that might convince the Council to reconsider, but there was nothing new to find, only the same troubling patterns arranged in different orders. The fleet's departure time approached steadily, marked by a countdown on my secondary screen, and I felt each passing minute like a small weight settling onto my chest. When the countdown reached 0, I did not celebrate the way many in the council building did, toasting to what they assumed would be an easy conquest. I sat alone in my dim observation room, watching the Ascendancy fleet accelerate toward the edge of known space, toward a silent blue planet that had stopped speaking to the rest of the galaxy for reasons none of us understood. I whispered a small, useless hope into the empty room, that whatever waited for them on the other side of that silence would show mercy neither the Council nor the Ascendancy had bothered to offer first. The Ascendancy fleet crossed into the outer edge of the Sol system a little over 3 days later, and I watched every second of it through a relay feed the Council had finally agreed to keep open, more out of curiosity than concern. Commander Kraith had insisted on broadcasting the operation to a select group of delegates, eager to prove his point in front of an audience. I was included on that list, though I suspected it was only so he could enjoy my discomfort in real time. The feed showed the fleet in perfect formation, 300 warships moving with practiced precision past the outer planets, their long dark hulls catching faint starlight. From the bridge cameras, I could see Ascendancy officers standing calmly at their stations, some even smiling, treating the moment like a ceremony rather than an act of war. Commander Kraith's voice came through the feed, smooth and confident. "Approaching the third planet," he said. "No resistance detected, as expected." I sat forward slightly, my eyes fixed on the sensor readings scrolling beside the main image. Earth grew larger on the screen, blue and white, beautiful in a way that made the coming violence feel even more wrong. "Beginning standard scan sweep," said a junior officer. For a moment, everything looked exactly as the Ascendancy had predicted. No warships rising to meet them, no visible weapons platforms, just a quiet planet circling a quiet star, apparently unaware or unable to respond to the approaching fleet. Then the first alert appeared. "Sir, we are detecting interference in our targeting arrays," said the same junior officer, his voice a little less steady than before. "Define interference," Commander Kraith said. "Our systems are receiving conflicting location data, multiple false readings across the fleet." I straightened in my chair, my heart beginning to pound. Tick floated closer to me, sensing the shift in my posture. "Recalibrate and continue approach," Commander Kraith ordered, his voice still calm, though I noticed a slight tightness creeping into it. The fleet continued forward, but the interference did not stop. More voices joined the channel, overlapping now, each reporting different malfunctions. Weapons Array 3 is not responding. Navigation is receiving corrupted data from external sources. Shield calibration failing on outer flank ships. Commander Kraith's tone finally shifted from calm to sharp. Identify the source of this interference immediately. There was a pause, filled only with static, and then a new voice entered the channel, calm and clear, speaking in perfect ascendancy language, though the accent carried something distinctly human underneath it. "You are entering restricted space," the voice said. "Turn back now." The bridge went silent for a long moment. I felt a chill pass through me, the same chill I had felt the night the silence began 6 months earlier. "Identify yourself," Commander Kraith demanded. "You already have your answer," the voice replied. "Leave, and no harm will come to you." Commander Kraith laughed, though it sounded forced now, an old habit rather than genuine amusement. "You dare threaten an ascendancy fleet with primitive tools and empty words. Continue the approach. Ignore the transmission." The fleet pressed onward, entering low orbit around Earth, and for a brief moment, nothing happened. I almost allowed myself to hope that perhaps this was simply a bluff, a clever trick meant to delay the inevitable. Then the first ship went dark. It happened without any visible explosion, without any dramatic flash of light. One moment, the ship called Ascendant Glory was moving steadily in formation, and the next moment, its lights simply vanished from every screen, its systems reporting complete failure across every function at once. "Ascendant Glory has gone silent," a voice reported, panic bleeding into the words. "No response on any channel." "Redirect support ships," Commander Kraith ordered, his voice rising now, the calm confidence draining away with each passing second. Before support ships could move into position, 2 more vessels lost power simultaneously, their engines flickering out, their weapons falling silent, drifting helplessly in orbit like toys with dead batteries. "This is not weapon fire," said a horrified voice on the bridge. "There is no impact damage. Their systems are simply shutting down." I leaned closer to my screen, watching the sensor data with growing dread. Whatever was happening to those ships was not violent in the traditional sense. It was precise, almost gentle, as if something intelligent and patient was reaching out and quietly switching off each system it touched. "All ships, initiate emergency shielding protocols," Commander Kraith ordered, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure. "Shields are not responding, sir," came the reply. "Our own systems are locking us out." Another ship went dark, then another. The Ascendancy fleet, once a symbol of unstoppable power, was beginning to fall apart in real time, not through explosions or fire, but through a silent and overwhelming loss of control. I watched Commander Kraith's face on the bridge camera, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by something closer to genuine fear. "Order a full retreat," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, half our ships are not responding to command input," an officer reported. "We cannot issue a retreat order to vessels that no longer answer us." At that moment, the same calm voice returned to the channel, speaking slowly and clearly, as though addressing a group of confused travelers rather than an invading force. "You entered without invitation," the voice said. "You brought weapons meant to remove us from our own world. We have chosen to disable your ships instead of destroying them, out of respect for the lives aboard them. This choice may not be repeated if you return." Commander Kraith stared at the main screen, his hands trembling slightly against the console. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice raw. There was a long pause before the answer came. "We are the people you called primitive," the voice said. "We are the ones you assumed could not hear you, could not see you, could not prepare for you. We suggest you correct that assumption before you make another mistake." The channel went silent after that. leaving only the sound of alarms echoing through the remaining functional ships of the fleet. Commander Kraith sat frozen for several seconds, staring at the darkened viewport where dozens of his ships now drifted lifeless in Earth's orbit, their crews trapped inside vessels that no longer obeyed them. I sat back in my chair, my hands pressed against my mouth, unable to look away from the screen. Around me, in the council spire, I imagined the same scene playing out in dozens of other observation rooms. Delegates, who had laughed only days earlier, now staring in stunned silence at a species they had underestimated for over a century. Tick floated beside me quietly, its small sensors focused on the same feed. "You were right," Tick said softly. I did not answer immediately. I simply watched as the remaining Ascendancy ships began a slow, disorganized retreat, leaving behind the disabled vessels and their stranded crews, unsure whether rescue or further consequence awaited them. For the first time since the emergency bell had rung days earlier, I felt something other than fear settle inside me. It was a strange, quiet realization, heavy and undeniable. Earth had not been hiding out of weakness. It had been waiting. The emergency session that followed made the earlier meetings look calm by comparison. Delegates arrived in a rush, many still absorbing second-hand reports, their expressions ranging from disbelief to open panic. Chancellor Idrin stood at the podium longer than usual before speaking, as though searching for words that did not yet exist in any language she knew. "Approximately half of the Ascendancy fleet remains disabled in Earth's orbit," she finally said. "The remaining vessels have withdrawn to the outer system, awaiting further instruction. Commander Kraith requests permission to negotiate for the return of stranded crew members." A murmur spread through the chamber, quieter than before, almost fearful. I noticed several delegates glancing toward me, the same observer they had dismissed only days earlier. I did not feel satisfaction from those glances. I felt only a heavy kind of relief, mixed with something close to dread. Commander Kraith entered the chamber shortly after, and the confident officer I had seen days before was gone entirely. His shoulders were slumped, his voice quiet as he addressed the council. "We were not prepared for what we encountered," he admitted. "Our scans showed no advanced defense systems, yet somehow our ships were disabled without a single weapon being fired against us." "Explain how this is possible," said a delegate near the front, his voice tight with disbelief. "We do not fully understand it ourselves," Commander Kraith said. "Our engineers believe some form of remote signal interference disabled our systems from within, rather than any external attack. It was as though our own ships turned against us." I stepped forward then, unable to remain silent. "May I share additional information?" I said, and this time no one hesitated before allowing me to speak. I activated the projection again, this time showing a piece of data I had kept quiet for months, unsure of its significance until now. It was an old recording captured by one of the vanished scouting drones over a year earlier, showing brief static followed by a strange pattern of light near Earth's upper atmosphere. "This was recorded shortly before the drone went silent," I said. "I believe now that these patterns were early tests of the very system that disabled the Ascendancy fleet. Humanity has likely been developing this technology for years, quietly, away from any external observation." Chancellor Idrin studied the image carefully. "You believe this was planned defense preparation, rather than a sudden discovery?" "I believe humanity understood long ago that they were being watched," I said, "and I believe they chose silence as their shield, allowing the rest of the galaxy to underestimate them while they prepared quietly beneath that assumption." The chamber fell into another uneasy silence. For the first time, I saw fear replace arrogance on the faces of delegates who had spent years mocking a species they now realized they barely understood. A new voice interrupted the moment, calm and steady, transmitted through the Council's own communication system, though no one had granted it access. "May I address the Council directly?" the voice said. Chancellor Idrin hesitated, glancing toward her security officers, who appeared just as startled as she was. "Identify yourself," she said carefully. "My name is Daniel Hargrove, the voice replied. I represent the Coordinated Defense Council of Earth. I understand you have questions. I am prepared to answer them, provided this conversation remains respectful. The chamber remained utterly silent, every delegate staring at the empty air as though expecting a figure to materialize before them. Chancellor Idrin straightened slightly, regaining some measure of composure. How did you gain access to this channel? She asked. The same way we disabled your fleet, Daniel Hargrove said simply. We have studied your systems far longer than you have studied ours. Commander Kraith stepped forward, anger and humiliation clearly fighting for control of his expression. You attacked ships under a diplomatic banner. That is an act of war. Your ships entered our system, carrying weapons intended for what you called a pacification strike, Daniel Hargrove replied, his tone still calm, without a trace of triumph. We disabled those ships without loss of life, despite having the ability to end that fleet entirely. I would ask you to consider which side showed restraint today. The room absorbed that statement in heavy silence. Even Commander Kraith, clearly struggling to maintain his composure, said nothing in response. Why have you remained silent for so long? Chancellor Idrin asked finally. Why allow the galaxy to believe you were primitive when clearly you were not? Because your council labeled us insignificant long before we ever had a chance to speak for ourselves, Daniel Hargrove answered. We studied the wreckage of your scouting vessel over a century ago, the one your council quietly wrote off as lost. From that wreckage, we learned that a much larger galaxy existed beyond our own sky, one that viewed us as either a curiosity or a resource. We chose to grow quietly, rather than reveal ourselves to a council capable of authorizing an invasion over a resource dispute. I felt a chill pass through me as the pieces finally settled into place. The old scouting vessel, the one whose disappearance had led to Earth's quarantine over a century ago, had not simply been lost to space. It had been recovered, studied, and understood, long before any of us realized humanity even knew we existed. You have been aware of us for over a century, Chancellor Idrin said slowly, almost to herself. We have, Daniel Hargrove confirmed, and in that time, we chose caution over confrontation, preparation over provocation. We hoped to reveal ourselves peacefully when the moment was right. Instead, the moment was forced upon us by a fleet arriving with orders to remove us from our own home. Chancellor Idrin lowered her head slightly, and for the first time since I had known her, she appeared genuinely uncertain of what to say next. What do you require from this council? She asked finally. An honest conversation, Daniel Hargrove said, something this council has clearly avoided where our species is concerned. We are prepared to discuss terms for peaceful contact, once your council demonstrates that such a conversation is even possible. The channel closed shortly after that, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Delegates exchanged uneasy glances, none of them quite ready to speak. Commander Kraith remained standing near the podium, his earlier arrogance replaced entirely by a quiet, humbled unease. I stood near the back of the chamber, watching the same delegates who had dismissed my warnings days earlier now struggling to process a truth they had refused to consider. I did not feel pride in that moment. I felt only the heavy weight of everything I had failed to convince them of in time, and the fear of what might have happened had Earth chosen a less merciful response. Chancellor Idrin finally turned to address the chamber, her voice quieter than usual. This session is adjourned, she said. We will reconvene once a formal proposal for contact has been prepared. The delegates filed out slowly, murmuring among themselves, their earlier confidence replaced by cautious uncertainty. I remained behind for a moment, staring at the empty projection where Earth had appeared only minutes before, blue and quiet and far more capable than any of us had ever imagined. Tick floated beside me once again, its small sensors dimmed in the quiet aftermath. The Council underestimated them, Tick said. The Council underestimated them because it was convenient to do so, I replied. It is easier to dismiss a quiet species than to consider what that silence might truly mean. I left the chamber that evening with a strange mixture of relief and unease settled deep in my chest. Earth had shown restraint where destruction had been possible, but I understood now that such restraint was a choice, not a guarantee, and choices could change depending on how the galaxy chose to treat them moving forward. 3 days passed before the council reconvened, and in that time, I returned to my observation post more often than I had in years, watching Earth with a mixture of caution and quiet respect I had never felt before. The silence from the planet had ended, replaced by careful, measured communication directed only at official council channels, nothing more. No threats, no demands, only patience. When the session finally began, the chamber felt different from before. Gone was the casual amusement that had once surrounded any mention of humanity. In its place sat a careful, almost nervous formality, as delegates who had once laughed openly now chose their words with visible caution. Chancellor Idrin opened the session by confirming that all disabled Ascendancy ships had been returned intact, their crews unharmed, released quietly at the edge of the system without further incident. Commander Kraith sat silently through this report, his earlier confidence long since replaced by something closer to humility. The Ascendancy Council has formally withdrawn its claim over Sol System resources, Chancellor Idrin continued. Given recent events, they have also requested this council's guidance on how to proceed with future contact. A representative I did not recognize stood near the front of the chamber, her voice hesitant. Perhaps quarantine should simply be reinstated, stronger than before, until we better understand the nature of this threat. I stepped forward before anyone else could respond. They are not a threat unless provoked, I said firmly. Every action taken by Earth so far has shown restraint, not aggression. They disabled an invading fleet without loss of life, when total destruction would have been simple for them. That is not the behavior of a species seeking conflict. Chancellor Idrin studied me for a long moment. You have advocated for this species since the beginning, Observer Vesic. Explain why you believe caution is the wiser path now. Because fear built on ignorance is what led us here in the first place, I said. This council labeled humanity insignificant based on outdated reports and its own comfortable assumptions. That same ignorance nearly led to a war none of us needed. If we continue treating them as a threat to be contained, rather than a species to be understood, I believe we will eventually create the very danger we fear. The chamber remained quiet, considering my words carefully. Commander Kraith finally spoke, his voice subdued. I underestimated them, he admitted. I based my judgment on old reports and my own assumptions, rather than the reality standing before me. I do not wish to repeat that mistake, nor do I believe this council should. Chancellor Idrin nodded slowly. Then let us proceed with caution, but also with respect. I propose we open formal diplomatic channels with Earth, under equal terms, rather than continued quarantine. The vote that followed passed with far less argument than I expected, though I noticed several delegates still exchanging uneasy glances, clearly uncertain about a species they had spent years dismissing. Later that evening, I received a private transmission at my observation post, one that bypassed every official channel the council monitored. Tick alerted me quietly, its sensors flickering with quiet curiosity. Unregistered signal detected, Tick said. Source unknown. I opened the transmission carefully, half expecting some kind of test from council security. Instead, the same calm voice I had heard days earlier greeted me directly. Observer Vesic, Daniel Hargrove said, I wanted to speak with you personally, away from the formal proceedings. I sat back in my chair, surprised at being addressed by name. How do you know who I am? We have studied every report filed about our world for years, he said. Yours were different from the others, careful, honest. You noticed things others chose to ignore, and you tried to warn your council, even when it cost you standing among your peers. I did not know how to respond immediately, unsure whether to feel gratitude or unease at being watched so closely myself. I only reported what I observed, I said finally. I did not expect anyone to listen, least of all the ones I was observing. We listen more closely than most assume, Daniel Hargrove said. It is a skill we developed out of necessity, watching a galaxy that watched us with suspicion long before we ever had the chance to speak for ourselves. What will you do now? I asked, genuinely curious. Now that your existence and your capabilities are known to the wider galaxy, we will continue as we always intended, he said, carefully, on our own terms. We do not seek conflict with your council, but we will not allow ourselves to be treated as a resource to be claimed either. I believe your recent vote reflects an understanding of that. It does, I said, though I suspect it will take time before the rest of the council fully trusts that understanding. Trust is built slowly, Daniel Hargrove agreed. We are prepared to be patient, provided the effort is returned in good faith. There was a brief pause before he continued, his tone shifting slightly, quieter than before. I wanted to thank you as well, he said, for seeing us as more than a report to be filed and forgotten. Perhaps understanding between our peoples will come easier, because at least one observer chose curiosity over convenience. The transmission ended shortly after that, leaving me alone in my quiet observation room, staring at the blue and green planet still glowing softly on my main screen. Tick floated closer, its sensors dimmed thoughtfully. You are troubled again, Tick said. No, I said slowly, surprised by my own answer. For the first time in a long while, I think I am hopeful. In the days that followed, formal negotiations between Earth and the Council began cautiously, each side testing the boundaries of trust with careful, measured steps. I remained assigned as lead observer for the Sol system, though my role had changed considerably. I was no longer simply watching from a distance, filing reports that few bothered to read. I had become, quite unexpectedly, a bridge between two worlds that had nearly destroyed any chance of understanding each other through fear and assumption alone. I often thought back to that first emergency bell, soft and gentle, the one that had filled me with dread rather than reassurance. I understood now that the true danger had never been Earth itself. The true danger had been a council so certain of its own judgment that it refused to question outdated assumptions until those assumptions nearly led to disaster. Humanity had not attacked out of aggression, nor had they hidden out of weakness. They had waited, patiently and quietly, choosing preparation over panic, restraint over retaliation, even when provoked by an invading fleet that expected an easy, one-sided victory. As I sat alone at my post one final evening, watching Earth's lights glow steadily against the darkness of space, I found myself smiling faintly, something I rarely allowed myself during my years of careful observation. The Council had once asked, in stunned disbelief, whether the Ascendancy had lost its mind by attacking Earth. I understood now that the real question had never been about the Ascendancy's sanity at all. It had always been about the Council's own blindness, and whether it would learn from this mistake before a far greater one arrived. For the first time in over a decade, I looked toward Earth not with pity, nor with fear, but with something closer to respect. And somewhere far below, on a quiet blue planet that had finally chosen to speak for itself, I believed that respect was, at last, being returned in kind.